Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Florida Student Success Center's webinar on co-requisite models in developmental mathematics, a review of promising practice. We are really excited to have participants from our mathematics redesign work groups, as well as national experts who have engaged in mathematics redesign work with us today. Before we dive into the content, let's go over a few of the webinar logistics. We will have all participants on mute for the duration of the webinar. The materials from today's webinar is in the handouts area that will be on your screen. In addition to a copy of the PowerPoint slides from today, we will also have a copy of the biographies from all of our panelists. If you have any questions during the duration of the webinar, feel free to enter them in the questions pane. We will monitor those over time. And at the end of the webinar, assuming we have enough time, we will answer those questions. We will also, if we're not able based on time to answer the questions here, follow up with the individuals who asked them after the fact to make sure that we're providing the information that's useful to you. Please note that we are recording this webinar and we'll be making it available on our YouTube channel and sharing it with the larger math redesign work. So that will be available to you after the fact. The agenda for today is starting with just a brief introduction and overview to the Student Success Center by me, Dr. Carrie Henderson. I'm going to turn it over to our partner at Jobs for the Future, Naima Mitchell, and she's going to talk about the scope of the framework. And then we have three national experts from different states who have engaged in mathematics redesign work. And so we're really excited to have you meet with them and learn from them. We will have a few follow-up questions with our panelists, and then assuming we have enough time, we will do audience question and answer. So as we move into the presentation, and I turn it over to Naima, really excited to welcome you to this Student Success Center webinar. As most of you know, the Student Success Center has been in place for over a year now, and we are proud that mathematics redesign has been a primary initiative this first year. And as part of that work group, I know many of our colleagues across the state are exploring co-requisite models. And so we are really delighted that our partner at Jobs for the Future is able to moderate this wonderful panel for us today. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our colleague, Naima Mitchell.
Hello, thank you, Carrie. Again, my name is Naima Mitchell, and I'm an Associate Director at Jobs for the Future. And I want to, again, extend my thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists today. Given the focus in Florida on mathematics pathways redesign, we are really hoping that this is a great primer for many of you who I know are joining the Mathematics Institute in June. By the end of this webinar, we hope that you walk away with some new information about promising math reforms that are being implemented across the country and how these reforms are impacting student outcomes. So I'm going to give each panelist about 10 minutes or so to tell you about their work. And then I've prepared a few questions that I'll ask the panelists. And then after that, I'm hoping that we still have about 10 to 15 minutes for some Q&A. As I think Carrie mentioned, please note that we're going to submit all questions using the chat feature. And I hope to read them in order. Any of those that we get to, that there will be an opportunity for the panelists to provide you answers at another time to your questions. And so just to briefly introduce our three panelists, we have Amy Getz, who's a manager at the Systems and Implementation for Higher Education at the Charles A. Dana Center. We are also joined by Jeanette Kim, the Interim University Assistant Dean for Pre-Matriculation Programs and Program Assessment for CUNY. And finally, we're joined by Ann Edwards, who is a senior research associate at WestEd, at Carnegie Math Pathways at WestEd. So now I'm going to hand it over to Amy, who is going to do our first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So if you want to go to my first slide, I always like to start with this little mantra. Actually, if you could go back to the titles page, we have a little mantra that we always try to ground ourselves in our work to think about our students, prepare, enable, empower. because that's what we're really trying to do for students, is prepare them for their future, enable them to achieve their goals, and empower them as mathematical learners. Now you can go to the next slide. So that's just always something we try to keep in the back of our mind as we're talking about our work, which often is, talking about it at a more change at a more systemic level. So the data center's been working on this concept of mathematics pathways for over 10 years. So we don't really talk about co-requisites just as co-requisites. We talk about them as part of a pathway. And I just think it's an important framing for us, so I wanted to start there. We do not have a single course structure or single curriculum or a single way that courses need to look like when we're working with systems. Instead, we have these 4 basic principles that we think are critical elements in high quality mathematics pathways. So the first 2 principles are about things that can happen that are about policy and structure, and these are things that can be changed very quickly. That doesn't mean to say it's easy, but that you can actually change an entire system at scale in a relatively short time around these 2 principles. The first is that all students enter directly into mathematics that are aligned to their future goals. So this is kind of a counterpoint to our old way of thinking, where we said, oh, everybody should go into intermediate algebra or college algebra, and then that opens all sorts of doors for them. And what we find out now, what we realize now based on data, is that it didn't really open doors for them, and that it's much better to get people on the path of with the mathematics content that's going to be valuable for them. The second, and that really connects also to the concept of guided pathways, which is something I know that you're thinking about in Florida. The second one is really where we're talking about co-requisites, that all students should be taking their mathematics, their gateway level mathematics in their first years of college, and preferably in the first semester. And that for students who are underprepared, the co-requisite model is really being shown to be the most appropriate model for them. If you can go to the next slide. So those first 2 principles, again, are about structural change that happens quickly. And then there's constant continuous improvement that we never want to lose sight of. And these are more about practice, habits in the classroom, things that are harder to change at scale all at once, but that you just keep working on, keep improving. So principle number 3 is about integrating strategies that support students as learners into the mathematics classroom, and also connecting those to similar strategies across the entire institution. And principle 4 is about instruction that is evidence-based, with evidence-based curriculum and pedagogy. So we talk a lot about that mathematics pathways isn't just about math, it's really systemic change. Next slide, please. It needs to include people across the institution. Math faculty need to be in the lead, but they cannot do all of the work alone. So what this graphic demonstrates is why we talk about this as a pathways perspective, why we think that's different than just thinking about course redesign. When you think about mathematics as a pathway, you think about where students are coming from, where they're going to, and the job of the educator is to design the pathway that creates a seamless transition for those students. And so even if it's a single course, that pathways perspective helps you think about the design in a different way. And out of when you're thinking about where students come from, you're looking at what strengths they bring in, where they're coming from in terms of their demographics, their age, which all of those have different needs and different strengths inherent in them. In the pathway, we always start asking about the student experience, and then once you know what the student experience should look like, you can then design what's the content, what are the supports the students need to support that experience. We really place a lot of emphasis on careful design that is based on looking at your current context, making decisions about what will fit within your system. And if I could say one thing that everybody could remember, and you forget everything else I say design for scale. So we see a lot of situations where colleges, they start with some little pilot and they design this beautiful program that has all these supports, but they can't scale it, and then it just goes away. So you should really be thinking about scale and sustainability from the beginning. And then you should be looking to where the students go to. Where are they going to transfer? Are they going to go to certificate programs? All of that are important part of thinking about your design of the actual courses. Next slide. So I'm just going to share some data with you from over a number of years because I wanted to kind of talk about this issue of co-requisites versus prerequisite models. When we first started this work, we were doing a year-long model because we really thought that was going to be the best for students. What you're seeing here are rates across the entire Texas community college system. So this is, working across over 50 community college districts, which many of those districts have multiple colleges within them. So it's a big system. And working with a year-long model, we started our work in 2012 with Texas. And in the 2 years that followed, you can see that we were getting increases across the entire system of the number of students completing their college-level math course in 1 year. That's close to a 39% increase there. That's an incredible achievement across the large system. And you can imagine there were some colleges that didn't change anything, and then there were colleges that really moved quickly. So we're really proud of that. Next slide, please. And then we started looking at data from across a number of different math pathways work, some of which have year-long models like ours, some of which were doing the one-semester co-requisite. And what we started seeing is those one-semester co-requisites were getting similar or better results than we were in one semester than we were doing in 1 year. And so now all of these different implementations that you're seeing represented here, they all have differences. You can't compare them exactly apples to apples, but actually that to us made that evidence even more powerful because it's saying it was the structure. It wasn't the little specifics about whether they had the co-requisite support course before the college level course, or whether they did cohort models, or if they had different instructors. Like that didn't seem to be the issue. What we saw is that across many different models of how courses were implemented, co-requisites were creating much better student outcomes. Next slide. This is a little case study from a college in Texas to kind of demonstrate that same idea. You see where they started. Just in completion of Dev Math in 2 years, they were around the 33% mark. So that's just completing the Dev Math over 2 years. So then they started to make some changes, and they actually got their completion of Dev Math in 2 years up to over 70%. But it's still only Dev Math. So then they went to the 1 year model, and they went to completion of the Dev Math within 1 year. They're making all these little inching forward, right? But then they just went full scale all at once. And they are a relatively small college, but they went full scale to a co-rec model, and you can see they were getting 70% completion of college level math within 1 semester. So one of the things I like about this is that you can see these people are really thinking about what's best for students. They're not just saying, well, we just did all this work, can't we just stop and wait? They're really saying, no, we can build on what we've done, continue to get better, and continue to do better for students. And then as just a last point, I want to talk a little bit about equity and equity concerns when institutions do not go full scale. Next slide. This is some very recent data. It actually has just been presented that is based on some of the early work that we did in Texas. And this is what happens when colleges don't make full-scale changes. So what this shows is these are colleges that this is the year-long model because that's where we were at that time. That they had the year-long model, that was their new reform, but they did it as, okay, we're going to just do a few sections. And then they retained their traditional DevEd model. Now, this study found that the students who were in the one-year DCMP model did much better. Their outcomes were much better. But look at who had access to it. Especially around if you look at comparing white students to Hispanic students much less likely to get access to the DCMP. Students with higher income, much more likely to get into the DCMP. This is demonstrating the inherent bias in a lot of our systems. And that's not about people, that's about institutional biases, that when we try to run parallel tracks, students get tracked based on the wrong reasons. And so I just think this is a cautionary tale that there's often a tendency to say, well, we shouldn't go full scale all at once. We should try to do a little at a time. And you really have to be careful. It also demonstrates that you have to constantly be looking at your data and asking these questions about equity. Would you then go to the next slide, please? So that was a really quick summary, and I just want to say we have a lot of resources available. We have a resource site at dcmathpathways.org. Specifically, if you're looking for some things around co-requisites, there's a little pathway you can follow there to get to our co-requisites, or you can just go to the resources page and search for co-requisites. We also have a lot of other resources around course design for different math pathways. So, you know, it's a good site to explore. Specifically, you'll find some templates that will help you have discussions about co-requisites, some planning advice about how to design your co-requisites, things you need to consider in those designs. There's a good design webinar. And I also wanted to mention we have a full implementation guide also for free on the resource site around all math pathways. And we're also holding a workshop for institutional teams on co-requisites May 21st and 22nd in Aurora, Colorado. And Angela has the link for the registration information.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. I believe next we're going to hand it over to our panelist, Jeanette Kim from CUNY. Jeanette?
Thanks, Naima. So my name is Jeanette Kim. I am with the City University of New York, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our CUNY START program. CUNY START is a little bit different than traditional remediation reform efforts in that the program looks to work within the pre-matriculation space for students. So to just give you a little bit of background, the City University of New York system is the nation's largest urban university system. We have 7 community colleges, 11 senior colleges, and we enroll more than 240,000 undergraduates. And we have more than 97,000 students seeking associate degrees each year. And unlike most community colleges across the country, 65% of our students in the associate degree programs have one or more remedial needs, math being the most prevalent. So the CUNY START, go back one slide, please. So the CUNY START program elements. So CUNY START provides an intense preparation in academic reading and writing and math and college success seminar to students admitted to CUNY whose scores on our assessment test indicate that they are in need of significant remediation. So these are students who are either triple remedial, they need the reading, writing, and math, or who may have deep needs in math, so they're coming in needing remediation from arithmetic forward. The overall program structure is that we are coordinated by a team of program staff in the central office at the university and central office professional development staff, and we work to support the program at 10 CUNY campuses. We are connected to placement and remediation policies throughout the university, are engaged in those conversations, and we work with our campuses to figure out the best fit for where CUNY Start would fit within their remediation sequence or offerings to students. Students can participate in the program either as full-time, meaning they address all 3 remedial needs, or as part-time, either in the reading writing space or the math space. And as I mentioned, we are a pre-matriculation program, so students defer matriculation for 1 semester, taking care of their remedial needs before then matriculating into their degree program. The curriculum and instruction portion of our program also has been centrally developed by reading, writing, and math experts. The curriculum is centered on reflection and inquiry. Our instructors in CUNY Start are trained using an apprenticeship model, and they're trained for a whole semester before even being considered to be hired as CUNY Start and Math Start instructors. And we do this on purpose because the way in which we are training our instructors to engage with the students is so radically different than traditional teaching, that traditional ways that they may have learned how to teach, that we feel that the apprenticeship model works the best. And all of our campus instructors are supported by a team of professional developers. Our advisement is embedded into the program, and we have a very low student to advisor to student ratio. Next slide, please. So the CUNY Start Math program in particular is based on developing students' growth mindset, really developing this "you can do it and it's okay to make mistakes" kind of mantra. It uses an inquiry-based approach and promotes conceptual understanding and reasoning in math. The curriculum is designed to teach students to understand number relationships and scaffolds to abstraction, and it interweaves 3 major strands, working with numbers and arithmetic to functions and then into elementary algebra. Our curriculum was designed to be aligned to the CUNY standards, the CUNY exit from remediation, what we call the CEEF exam. It's our CUNY Elementary Algebra Final Examination. It is a university-wide final from remediation. And we did this on purpose because it was important to show that the students coming out of the CUNY Start program were meeting the same benchmarks and standards as quote-unquote regular students exiting from the college's traditional remediation sequence. Next slide, please. So how do we know that the program works? So in this slide, you'll see that this is descriptive statistics. On the left, you see the blue bars indicate students with remedial needs. The darker shade of blue indicates the more need that they have. So the darkest blue is students who need who are coming in needing three subject areas: the reading, the writing, and the math. And on the right-hand side, the orange is students who have met proficiency. And so you see pre-CUNY Start, you have 69% of the students coming into our full-time program needing all 3 remedials: reading, writing, and math. And by the end of the program, more than half of them are leaving with 0 remedial needs, so they've met proficiency in all 3 areas. We see also gains on the part-time program. The difference there is that students may be addressing just one of the 3 areas of their remedial need. But in all cases, we see that the effect is the most profound in the math group, in the students who need math. When we disaggregate by subject area and we look at students who need the double math, so they are they're coming in needing algebra or from algebra, we see the effects are even greater. Next slide. MDRC is we are in the middle of an MDRC RCT evaluation of the CUNY Start program. This is in collaboration with MDRC and CCRC, and it's showing that CUNY Start works, that students are making more progress than the control students in the study, especially in math. And while CUNY Start students earned fewer credits in the first semester, they attempt more credits in the second semester and actually accumulate more credits by the end of the second semester. This makes sense because our students, again, are deferring first semester before they're matriculating, but you see they catch up and then they start to accumulate credits faster than their peers. We see CUNY Start students have higher rates of enrollment and re-enrollment in the second semester, and 57% of the students coming out of CUNY Start are proficient in math versus 25% of the control group. Next slide, please. We've also done some quasi-experimental analysis on CUNY Start students versus a comparison group. Again, we see the outcomes are good for the CUNY Start students. We see high levels of gateway course enrollment and success for CUNY Start students compared to their peers, the non-CUNY Start students. Within 2 years, CUNY Start students enrolled in more English gateway courses by 18% and 62% more in gateway math classes in 2 years than their matched comparison peers. CUNY Start students pass gateway math courses at a rate higher than their comparison group, 9.1 percentage points higher. And students pass English and math at 7 percentage points higher than their peers. The left-hand side of the slide here shows 1-year outcomes. The right-hand side shows 2-year outcomes, and you can see the difference. The CUNY Start group being in the blue and the comparison group being in the orange. The success is especially notable for those least prepared. After 1 year, students who were triple remedial in CUNY Start passed English gateway courses at a rate of 18 percentage points higher than their comparison group, and passed math gateway courses at 12 percentage points higher than their comparison groups. And we found this result similar after 2 years as well. We are looking to do now looking into the CUNY Start model for broader access and college completion. So we know that our model works really well with students who are coming in with deep remedial needs, other than first-time freshmen coming into the university. Other populations that we're starting to look at are students coming into the university with HSC degrees. We're looking at other pre-college populations. CUNY has a very robust pre-college partnership program, including early college schools and other pre-college population. And we're also starting to look at returning adult learners as populations to engage in this work. We are looking at potentially expanding our model to work with students who are multiple repeaters, so students who may have tried and not been able to be successful in developmental math classes or math or English classes, for 2 or 3 semesters, and putting them through the CUNY Start pathway instead. And we're really looking at CUNY Start as a very purposeful pipeline into our ASAP program. Our ASAP program is our associate's degree completion program, looking to double our graduation rates in our associate degree programs within 3 years. So that's information about CUNY Start. We're starting to plan design studios and training models for colleges interested in learning more, and perhaps even piloting CUNY Start at their own campuses, and we'll be putting out a resource guide probably sometime in September or October.
Great, thank you so much, Jeanette. And now on to our final panelist, Ann Edwards.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Edwards. I'm the Director of Learning and Teaching at the Carnegie Math Pathways at West Ed, and I'm very happy to join you here. I'm going to tell you today, about our journey with our co-requisite courses. I'll start a little bit by giving you some background on Statway and Quantway, the Carnegie Math Pathways, just as some sort of foundational background, but really the bulk of what I'm going to be talking about today, is focused on the design of, implementation models related to, and our lessons learned with respect to our co-requisite implementation. All right, go ahead. For a long time now, we as a community have been faced with the challenges of developmental mathematics education as it has been traditionally designed, where fewer than a third of students placed into developmental math ever complete their college math requirements. And co-requisites have emerged as a powerful and very visible solution recently. What I wanted to do, however, right at the outset was to be very clear what we mean in our work by co-requisite. There are a lot of different ways in which the term has been taken up. And we have a very specific way in which we have sort of conceptualized and implemented co-requisite models. So what we mean is where one course, typically the college course, of course, must be taken in conjunction with and at the same time as another course. So for example, a college level statistics course, typically 3 transfer credits along with, that takes 3 contact hours, would be taken at the same time as the co-requisite support course that is often, not always, and I'll talk more about that later, around 3 non-transfer credits, and sometimes, not always, might take 3 contact hours. All right, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize this was going, yeah, there you go. Before diving into the co-recs, I'd like to start with a bit of background. In 2010, the Carnegie Foundation launched a network of researchers and practitioners to address the issue around developmental education that I mentioned earlier. The results were 2 new pathways, and these are 1-year pathways. And of course, we did this work in partnership with the Dana Center and Amy's work, and everything she describes is very, very true for us as well. Those pathways, called Quantway and Statway, accelerated the traditional course sequence to a 1-year pathway that took students who placed into developmental level to and through their gateway course, achieving college level credit. Those courses challenged the notion exactly of what kind of mathematics students really needed to learn. And they were designed with research-based, innovative curricular principles and pedagogical principles in mind. In particular, curriculum that is ambitious, deeply relevant to students, and problem-centered that promotes students' productive struggle. Pedagogy that is student-focused, that really highlights collaboration as the cornerstone of what students' activities are. And importantly, the integration of productive persistence interventions and practices that target the socio-emotional aspects of students' engagement and learning. Go ahead. With these 2 pathways, we of course have had several years of, oh, no, can you go back one? Yeah. Several years of results to draw upon, and I'm gonna really quickly just tell you about how the full-year pathways did as a background to our results I'm gonna show you later on the co-rec implementation. So this particular slide and the next one focus on Statway, but the Quantway results are very, very similar. In a propensity score matching analysis that we did, we saw that Statway students throughout the last several years of Statway's existence have outperformed matched students who are placed and take the courses in the traditional sequence by up to 3 times in half the time. So that means that Statway students are successful in completing Statway, which achieves their developmental requirement plus college level statistics credit at about 56% by comparison to students at their same institutions who are matched to them completing college level credit within 1 year at only 6% and within 2 years at 15%. Go ahead. We have also, of course, looked at the outcomes for subgroups and have seen that both Statway and Quantway students in all of the subgroups by race and gender dramatically outperform matched peers. So, oh, go ahead. All right, so with that as just some background, I apologize, I had to do that very, very quickly. We, in our journey, starting a couple years ago, wanted to create options that would further accelerate students' progress through mathematics, allowing them, as Amy mentioned, to be able to move on within the sort of larger framework of pathways that connect to their desired degree goals in an efficient way, in an effective way, but that also really reflected what we had learned in the one-year pathways about how to help students and support students to be successful learners, to be able to engage in mathematics, and to be able to achieve in the ways that we knew that they could. So we approached the issue of co-requisite design with the sort of problem of, okay, so we know what worked in the one-year pathway. How can we design co-requisites that reflect what we know work best? So active collaborative learning, productive struggle, rich authentic context, productive persistence and social emotional learning supports, language and literacy supports throughout the curriculum and pedagogy, and do so in a way that aligned curriculum and pedagogy between the college and co-rec components, but that also, because we run actually a network of about 90 institutions, allowed for flexibility of implementation. So as I'll show you, our colleges actually implement our co-rec models in a variety of different ways, and our materials and our supports needed to be able to support those decisions and flexibility and implementation. And in order to better do that, we have developed guides for the recommended use of those materials by faculty and administrators in the design and implementation. All right, go ahead. So much of this work is really hot off the presses, and we actually have a brand new report on our website that you can pick up if you want to learn more about what we learned. So the first year of administration was last calendar year, 2018, and it was largely a pilot year. The Quantway Co-Rec was piloted at 3 institutions with 7 faculty, about 185 students. The Statway Co-Rec was at 3 institutions, 13 sections, and 225 students. Go ahead. And this slide just shows you that there is some variability in at least this aspect of implementation, what they chose to allocate in terms of contact hours and credits for the college level component and the co-requisite component. I'm going to highlight one thing here, that there were some institutions that chose to really limit the number of contact hours allocated to the co-requisite, and that was, in the end, a very important factor in the success of their implementation. Go ahead. So these are the results of those pilot, of the calendar year 2018 pilot implementations. And you'll see that overall the student success rate is 65%. And that is, if you recall, significantly higher than even the Statway and Quantway full pathway results. And this reflects, as Amy showed you, the sort of national trends in co-requisite versus one-year pathway, or certainly the traditional sequence success rates. And so we were really pleased with that. We felt like the co-requisite model didn't do damage, let's say. This was one of the first questions we had when we entered into this, and happily served students very well. But you will also see that there's a lot of variability in the co-requisite success rate, from a high of 83 in institution A to a low of 39 in institution C. Institution C had a total number of contact hours for the entire college plus co-rec component of 4. And as it turns out, not only from the quantitative data, but also from qualitative conversations that we've had with a number of stakeholders at that institution, that was a determining factor in that low success rate. And they are actually, in future implementations, going to be changing that. And actually, these data were critical for, in conversations with administrators about essentially what kinds of co-requisite contact hours are going to be allowed in the institution. Go ahead. Okay, so we learned lots of things, and I want to share a lot of some of those things with you. So some elements of a successful implementation of COREX, and I should say that we learned this through a pretty in-depth quantitative and qualitative study of the pilot institutions. We talked to students, we talked to faculty, we talked to administrators, we did observations, we looked at all kinds of numbers. So, of course, it allows for faster completion. The important aspect of that, of course, is reducing the transitions between courses. An important element of the success, it was felt by the participants, was the instructional approach that I mentioned, and the important alignment of those components between college and COREC, like productive persistence being aspects of both components, that the pedagogy and a focus on collaboration was aspects of both components, that a focus on rich tasks that are contextualized was a focus on both components. And then the third bucket here really has to do with what I just mentioned, that higher contact hours seemed, not terribly surprisingly, to correlate with higher success rates. Go ahead. It was also felt very strongly by all the institutions that a cohort model was important for the success of the students. The students also felt that this was important, that the students stayed together in the college and co-rec class times. A lot of preparation time was needed. So giving additional preparation time, or at least preparing instructors that they will need to have a lot of preparation time for teaching these courses was critically important. And of course, related to that is having a lot of support and allowing, this was actually really, really important, this notion of instructor collaboration, both within institutions and across institutions, in order to be able to share their successes and frustrations and to be able to problem solve together. This, of course, is a new model for many, many instructors across the country. And so the more we found, the more opportunities they had to sort of engage in professional learning and conversation and engagement together, the more effective they were in the classroom and the more confident they felt about what they were doing. And then lastly, it was really important to be extremely clear with students about the expectations that they carry into this course. It's a very different kind of course for a lot of students, and the lift can be very high. And students, they felt, the faculty in particular, felt that it was critically important to be explicit with students about those expectations early on, and then to consistently add encouragement that, yes, this takes a lot of time, yes, this is very challenging, but you can do it. Go ahead. There were two challenges that emerged as consistent across all the institutions. One is of limited time. It's a lot of material. There's a lot of decision-making that has to be done, a lot of planning that has to be done. So time not only within the classroom, but then also time outside of the classroom. The pedagogy that focuses on collaboration and student-centeredness can also feel like it takes more time, which creates a feeling of having more constraints on your time on the part of the instructor. And then the need to really assess students carefully, in particular at the beginning of the course, more so than might be the case in non-co-requisite courses, was felt by instructors to be a real burden on their time, but they also felt that it was critically important. That's related to the other challenge that they all mentioned about student preparedness. So we know that co-requisite courses are designed to support students who require remediation. However, the instructors were not prepared for the range of both reading levels and the range of fundamental mathematics skills that they were encountering in those courses. And that while they felt that it was a successful and effective experience for all students, it took a lot for them, in particular early on in the course, to really understand what the range of reading levels were and the fundamental math skills, and to be able to provide supports for those students. So they really emphasized the need for early assessment. Go ahead. And then the last three lessons really had to do with, in our case, what we as designers and supporters of faculty and administrators and institutions engaged in this work learned. So the first has to do with the materials themselves. Because there is so much content to cover, we really needed to think about how to best streamline the materials, not just in terms of content, but in terms of flow and usability. The second has to do with the really number one sort of importance of support for faculty in all of this. Training, print materials, online materials, opportunities for faculty to collaborate and learn from one another. All of this is critically important for success. And then the last really has to do with making sure that administrators, in particular administrators in other units that have a real impact, that might be other programs that these students would be entering into upon completion, or it could be placement, people involved in placement and advising, or mathematics department administrators. Everyone needs to be aware and on the same page in order to make these things effective, sustainable, and more broadly accepted by faculty administrators for scaling. I think I have one more slide. Yeah. So what I hope you came away from this with is just a sense of some of our lessons learned, which we think are very applicable probably to other folks who are out there trying to do this work. If you want to learn more, go to our website. It's listed there. And as I mentioned, there is a new report within the last month about our co-recs and what we've learned. We're also hosting workshops upcoming in California and in the Midwest that will have components that are focused on co-requisite design and implementation. And of course, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact me. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan. So I know we have a few minutes left, and I have some questions that I would like to ask of the panelists. And this first question that I have is for Amy and Ann, actually. I know that there are different ways of defining co-requisite, but can you each talk to us about some common misperceptions of the concept of co-requisite? And if Amy, you want to start, then Ann, if you want to follow.
Sure, and I really liked the way Ann defined co-requisite. I think we would agree with that. One thing that we see is that some people think of co-requisite as, oh, we'll just take the Dev Ed course and have the students take that Dev Ed course at the same time as the college level course, instead of really thinking about how to design those to be a support for the course that provides just-in-time support and really thinks about the social emotional learning aspects. So I think that's one of the, I don't know if it's a misconception so much as a poor design choice, but that's definitely something we see as a concern.
Great, and Ann?
Yeah, I would completely agree with Amy. One of the sort of opinions that we run across a lot is, how could this possibly work? Because students who need help couldn't possibly do the college level work at the same time they're doing the work that's going to help them do the college level work. And I think one of the things that in those conversations we can often forget is these students often have already done a lot of this content before. They've encountered this content before, maybe not last year, but they have. And so we need to sort of reorient people to think differently about how they engage in that content, and that students really can and are able to do the college level work with, as Amy just said, the right kinds of supports in terms of not only the content and how it's presented and how people engage with the content, but also the learning environment and how we design that learning environment to support them to be able to do so effectively. I think that's one of the very biggest voices that I hear out there. The other is a much more mundane one that just has to do with the kind of definition of co-requisite that's out there. There's interestingly, I think in some areas of the United States, it's different state by state because of policy, a lot of confusion about what co-requisite means, whether it is any old course that you take with any old course, or whether it's a college level course that you take with support. or whether it's a developmental course that you take with fundamental support. And it causes just a kind of disconnect in sort of the national discourse, I find. But that's, I think, just a question of the community being clear about what it is we mean when we talk about these things.
Great, thank you. And so my next question is for Jeanette. What would you say are 2 important lessons that colleges and systems should consider when they're thinking about a pre-matriculation program such as CUNY Start?
I think it's not very different than some of the things that Amy and Ann brought up when they were talking about how they scaled their programs. There's lots of moving pieces for a program like CUNY Start. It takes into consideration not only instruction and curriculum, but also aligning advisement, sequencing into next courses, and how students are coming in and leaving then the program and matriculating into that space. So that's one lesson. Even though the program itself at CUNY is fundamentally the same, it looks slightly different from campus to campus, even within our system. So that's one important lesson. The other one is, I think, related to that, is that there has to be a degree of flexibility in terms of meeting the needs of who your students are and how to support them. That the fundamental tenets of the program then remain the same, but that, where you can find the flexibility to meet the students where they are, I think is another important lesson. The more you know about the students and why they're struggling, the easier it is and the better it is for you to plan around that.
Great, thank you. And my last question actually speaks to something that Amy brought up in the beginning, and the importance of thinking about scale and sustainability from the outset. And that's particularly important when we're thinking about equity, because the students who are often left behind with programs like this are students of color. And so I would like for each of you to speak to what you see as some 1 to 2 immediate challenges to scaling math reforms in community colleges in particular. And let's start with Ann.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Oh goodness. I think there are many challenges. I think a significant challenge with the institutions with whom we work, and as Amy said, it is critically important for institutions to undertake math reform at scale. They need to have scale and sustainability in mind from day one. They may not necessarily be able to begin fully at scale, but to have it in mind in their design and implementation planning. So an immediate challenge I think that we've run across is simply and kind of obviously communication across different units on campus. As one example, an institution that we are working with recently, the folks in placement and advising are obviously in a completely different part of the house than the math department and developmental education. And before we put them together, they had literally never spoken to each other. And it became clear within the first 10 minutes that some of the challenges that were really significant barriers to moving forward with the scaling of math reform in the math department had to do with decisions that were being made in placement and advising. And giving folks an opportunity to really talk about how their work influences and affects one another in meeting their joint goal, which is to better serve students, was critically important. So an immediate challenge, I think, is really finding ways to support effective communication across challenges across units and silos within institutions to enable them to scale.
Thank you. Jeanette?
I think another challenge, what Ann points out is very true. Another challenge that I think we see is that there are multiple reforms happening at the same time. And not all, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And so it really is important to have those conversations within the institution to see what's working for whom and what makes the most sense for which population of students and why you're doing what you're doing. So, you know, and so just to be able to tease out which is the best reform for what students, I think, is a challenge, but it's important, and it's important to know that they can all coexist. It's just a matter of how you're making that happen.
Great, thank you. And Amy?
So we talk a lot about the need to make these reforms no longer reforms, but actually it's a normative practice, meaning that, you know, your normative practice is what you do day to day that's just so routine you don't even realize you're doing it. And that's a challenge because you have to change culture. You know, Anne spoke to that really well about changing attitudes towards students, and there's changing attitudes towards the role of faculty, the roles of advisors, about how we all work together. So there are cultural changes, there are structural changes, and so there's got to be some really intentional leadership thinking about how do you make this part of routine practice, how do you create structures and protocols and processes that constantly reinforce. Because one of the biggest challenges is when these things are only implemented because there's one great champion or a few champions that really make sure it happens. When those champions go on to another piece of work or they go somewhere else, things tend to backslide. So moving towards true normative practice is the ultimate goal, and it's tough, and it takes some really good leadership.
Great. Thank you very much, Jamie. So I think we have approximately 3 minutes left. So I want to pause for a second, and if there's anyone who would like to ask a question, if you want to pop it into the chat box, I'll wait about 30 seconds to give you a chance to insert a question.
Naomi, could I just address one thing that, if you don't have a question, I think is a common question we get, is there is, I think, a natural skepticism sometimes for faculty to say, you know, I just can't believe that these students I've seen struggling can do so much better in this faster model, and that seems counterintuitive. And so they ask about how do you know the standards are the same or the rigor is the same. And I just always like to remind people that you have multiple sections of, say, statistics or college algebra right now taught by multiple people. How do you maintain rigor standards across those? Whatever systems you have in place for that should be applied to co-requisites. You know, having common assessments can be helpful. But I do like to encourage people not to set a higher standard for co-requisites, not expect more proof than you would for your existing structures. But that's always a good question to ask of all your courses, and having some systems in place to ensure rigor and standards is a good thing.
Great, thank you, Amy. Since it doesn't seem that we have any questions, Jeanette or Anne, is there anything that you all would like to say to close us out?
Just that, you know, on the pre-matriculation space, there's benefits to being able to work within that space. It is very much like a bridge program, and some colleges can see it as a bridge program. The program itself it's a very intense model, which is why we have it so that students are deferring a semester. But there are other things to take into account too. When students are deferring, you know, there's implications on financial aid, there's implications on other things that might be happening outside of the academic space. But, you know, again, lots of moving pieces and things to take into consideration when you're thinking about bringing on board any kind of academic program to help students.
Great, thank you. And with that, Carrie, I think I'll hand it back over to you if you want to say some final things, I guess, before the end of our webinar.
So this is Angela, and we wanted to thank all of you for your participation. And in closing, it was just outstanding information. We wanted to share a save the date. We will be hosting on June 27th a Mathematics Redesign Institute, which is the culmination of the year-long work of our mathematics work groups. And we will be meeting at the University of Florida Hilton Conference Center. Registration information will be made available shortly, and we will send that out to everyone. But please put a hold if you can attend. There is no charge to attend, and we're looking forward to sharing the great work of the year and the culmination of that. So with that, we thank everyone for your attendance, and we look forward to the next time we can host a webinar. So thank you, each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.